Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years and recently became a mom. In today's episode, we speak to Emily Ziff Griffin, who shares with us how introducing her two children to films has opened up incredible family dialogue. And please remember that myself and guests are speaking from their personal experience and not giving any parenting advice, simply inspiration. Let's dive into the episode. Hello and welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and I'm here with guest today, Emily Ziff Griffin. Emily is novelist, screenwriter, and producer, and was just recently on a beautiful podcast called Mothering Heights that goes through her creative career, which I'll link to in the show notes. I am excited to invite Emily here because she was pretty influential in my own journey into storytelling. My very first internship in the industry was for a talent manager, and Emily was the assistant, and my first time really in an office. It was my first time being around the industry at all. And I will never forget the first day I was working there. And Emily was like, why don't you pick a script and read it? When you come back next week, you can discuss it with me. And I never felt so cool sitting on the subway reading anything before. I believe the script I chose was Almost Famous because I was obsessed with that film and one of the clients was a star in it. So anyway, thank you, Emily, for that and for being here today.
That is so fantastic. I love being rocketed back, I guess, probably about 20 years at least, more to that time. I loved that I was at least a small part of your journey, your creative journey, and I love it. It's a great little anecdote moment.
Thank you. So I wanted to kick off this conversation with asking you what your first memory is of watching a movie and what that film was.
Yeah, so it's very vivid to me and it's very significant. I love that that's the question because it's something I think about a lot. I can't say for sure it's the first movie, but I know it's the first movie I saw in a theater and it's the first movie I remember seeing. And the film was E.T. and I was, I think, about 4 years old. I went to the theater with my father and his then boyfriend, Michael. And I remember it. I just remember it like on a visceral, impressionistic level, like in my body. I remember the sort of thrill of it. And I remember the 80s-ness of it, like the time period and the world of it was palpable and recognizable. And it's indelibly linked at this point with how I remember my childhood and the 1980s. And just that feeling of being a child with the sense of both agency and fear. Like, I think that film captures, I think that aspect of childhood, right? Where we feel like powerful and capable and like we want to have adventure. And then we're also so little and so vulnerable and so scared and we don't understand anything. Even at 4 years old, like I just feel like I internalized all of that film. And then, of course, the heartbreak and the sort of sense of loss at the end of it. And I remember very distinctly like grabbing my father's hand in the aisle on the way out of the theater and just that need for connection in the sort of wake of the sadness of the film's ending. And yeah, that was it. And to this day, like I have a mild Steven Spielberg obsession and Jaws is actually my favorite movie of all the movies in the world. And I think it began with that experience of seeing that film.
That film, I think, really must have defined our generation because this is the fourth time of my 4 recordings so far that E.T. has come up as an early memory or a favorite memory or a first film they wanted to show their children. It certainly captured something. It was maybe an innocence that's it's incredible. You mentioned Jaws. Do you remember how old you were when you saw that?
So I'm not exactly sure when I saw the whole movie start to finish. I know that I saw part of it around the age of 10, I want to say. My parents had an advertising agency and they had a company retreat at someone's house, I think it was like a board member's like suburban home. And we lived in New York City, so it's sort of special to be in like a house with a swimming pool and it was like a big house, right? Which was not where I grew up. And I think he had sons and they were like a little older and they were watching, there were teenagers there and they were watching Jaws in the family room in this house. And I remember watching a big chunk of it and being like so caught up and then also so fucking terrified. Like the scene where like the dead body pops out when Richard Dreyfuss is scuba diving along the wreckage of this boat and this like body that's like dead face pops out like that. I remember so vividly being just terrified. But I think it was probably high school by the time I like sat and watched the whole film. And then by college, it was just my favorite movie. Like I just had this really clear sense of like how it did everything, how it was so strong on character, like these incredibly complicated, interesting, fully realized characters in a story that also had social, like socioeconomic elements and themes, and then was like this insanely commercial success, so entertaining, so just fun, and then beautifully made. Like the filmmaking in it is, I know we all know the story of like how it was like accidental in certain ways, but the end result, the filmmaking of it is just, it's sublime. So it does all of that, which I just continue to think is like, how it's like we all strive for one of those things. We try to make something and he did all of them. Yeah.
It seems like there was a turning point from like obviously 4-year-olds at ET to you recognizing the craft of cinema. And I was wondering when that was. Like when did you start noticing cinema as a craft?
That's a great question. I think that would have been in 10th grade because in 10th grade my father died the summer before 9th grade. Actually, I would say 9th grade is where it began because in 9th grade, I had my first like serious boyfriend and we would go and watch a lot of art house films. Like I remember watching The Cook, The Thief, His Wife and Her Lover. That was like a big kind of, oh, wow, that's what a film can be. And then in 10th grade, my boyfriend and I broke up because he went to college. And so I was like bereft. And my best friend and I would go to the Angelica Film Center in New York every single Saturday night. And we would just watch whatever was showing. That year it was like, I think it was the year of True Romance. It was the Joy Luck Club. This is one of the consequences of COVID is that I can't remember the names of things. I don't know if you've had this. There's the film with Kate Winslet when she was very young, Peter Jackson's film.
Oh, I don't.
Where she and her friend, I would have to look that up. But anyway, that was another like kind of jaw-dropping.
Heavenly Creatures?
Heavenly Creatures. Thank you so much. That was like, those are the films like during that year where I was just, my mind was blown in terms of what's possible. Like how different films can achieve different things in different ways. And I know that sounds like a very blanket statement, but that was like where I started to realize, oh, you can tell a story visually. You can tell us, even Pulp Fiction, I think was like the next year. You're just like, oh, I didn't know a movie could do that. I didn't know you could tell a story in a way that was sort of departed from what I had maybe experienced up till then, which was pretty straightforward. And I really give my mother, actually, I mean, it's just such a fascinating conversation as a parent, but like, thinking about it from the child's point of view, like my mom and I watched a lot of movies. And I think I talk so much in my other work about like my father's influence on my life. My mother, I think, is really where I learned to love films. Like she's the one who really taught me that. We had an entire floor to ceiling wall of bookcases in our house that was all VHS cassettes. Like my mother purchased movies. Like she had her own, it was this massive film sort of library, all of Hitchcock's films I watched from a very young age. I would say probably starting at 8, 9, 10, watched all of them with my mother. And she really taught me to love his work. And that like, even then going to college and like studying his work from a really theoretical standpoint. But I had loved those films from a very young age.
Do you know what made your mom love movies?
That's a great question. I've never asked her that. I think she's got such a big sort of sentimental heart. And so I think she also like has a huge imagination and has always lived a little bit in a fantasy in a way, or she's very connected, I think, to a fantastical like worldview. And she grew up in the theater. Like she was an actor as a teenager, then worked in the arts for her entire career. And so I think just like loving actors, loving stories, loving world of the theater and like the sort of magic of that, I think is a big part of who she is. And I think that was like our escape in a way. We had some challenges when I was growing up in life. And so it was like a wonderful way for us to just escape into other worlds. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, when do you think you developed your taste?
Oh my God. I almost think about when they talk about sculptors, like how the sculpture is in the marble and the sculptor is just revealing it, right? I actually feel like my taste has been my taste probably since I was 4 years old and saw E.T. But my lifetime has been a process of like really understanding it and in some ways embracing it, in some ways weeding away the things that I feel like I should like, or to get to the authentic truth of what is it that I love? What do I love? And the truth is I love a lot of different things. And I don't feel like I have a very narrow lane in which I can embrace something. There's like a lot of stuff that I guess people would consider lowbrow that I think is like brilliant and I love and has a real place in my heart. And then I can also appreciate like really sophisticated kind of aesthetic. And I don't know. I don't know. I feel like it's still evolving. Like it's like I try to keep open. And I think for me, it always comes back to, does something connect to me emotionally? Do I feel something from this? If I feel something, then it can look a lot of different ways, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So do you have a sense of your children's taste?
Yes, I do. And it's very interesting. My daughter, who's 11, I will say, just to say, my kids watch a lot of film and TV. And what's been wonderful in the last, like, I would say year to 2 years, probably 2 years, is that they've gotten old enough, and they're still not very old. My son is 8, my daughter's 11, but they're old enough that we've really started to introduce a lot more and things that we love, right? And so it's not Frozen, and we went through that period of time. But now we're into, like, we all watched The Fabelmans this year. We watched Elvis. I'm trying to think of what other, Glass Onion. Like those are the kinds of films now that we're watching and loving those films together as a family, which is just exciting. So my daughter, she's a little bit more interested in romance. She watched all of Gilmore Girls. Like she loves a good sort of romantic story, good sort of soapy story. We also watched Riverdale, which was a definite sort of question mark in terms of age appropriateness, but it was like a great family watch for the most part. And there were some parts where my son was like, this is too much. And he would like disappear into his iPad for a little bit. But for the most part, like we were able to hang through it and talk about a lot of the stuff that was like a little scarier or a little more grown up. So my daughter, you definitely leaning towards soapy stuff, but like we watched Elvis, and 15 minutes into Elvis, she turned to me and she was like, I love the directing in this. Like she was able to articulate like that there was something about the filmmaking in that movie that she really was like engaged with.
That's interesting. I had another parent tell me that when she showed her son at 5 E.T., he said, who voiced E.T.? She's a voiceover actress.
Oh, wow.
And so it's interesting to me that I didn't understand craft of cinema until my teens. I didn't think about it. I just was lost in suspending disbelief in the movies and the stories. And so I'm wondering like why they can get it so young. Are they able to suspend disbelief?
That's a great question. I think they are. I mean, I think in both the cases we're talking about, this other parent and me, it's like we work in the business. So they are aware that they see behind the curtain just because they see me in my work. They know that I'm writing screenplays. They know that I've been on movie sets. They know that so there's an element of just immersion in the craft of making the things. They're also, I think, exposed to so much more content, and they consume so much more content than we did. And they have choices around it in a way that we didn't have. It's like we were like really at the mercy of what was on the television at any given time on those 5 channels. Maybe we got cable once we were in high school. We would still have to go to the video store and pick out 1 or 2 things to watch for the weekend. It was a much more deliberate process for us. And I think for just voraciously consuming, and it's a choice in our house to talk about the craft of these things. And they know who directors are, sometimes because they're people I'm in conversation with about projects. They know I used to work with an actor. I worked with Philip Seymour Hoffman for 10 years. So they, there's just like an awareness on that level that I think I certainly didn't have. But it's a good question. Are they able to suspend disbelief? In a way, the films have gotten so much more graphic and realistic. But I find the shark in Jaws so much more realistic and terrifying than I do in Sharknado or whatever.
Working across different media, I say this a lot. I find when a story is really transcendent, like when you're reading a book, you forget that you're turning the page. And like when you're watching movie or TV, you forget, like you just let go of that and you just get absorbed. And so from the conversations that I'm having before I started recording and now, I'm hearing more and more that they always keep one foot out. Like they're very aware of what's happening.
Interesting. Gosh, that's so interesting. I wonder if it's also the nature of technology and the fact that we saw a lot more movies in the theater. We didn't hold it in our hands in the same way. So in a way that I think tablets they are immersive in a different way. And in some ways they're more immersive, but they're also, there's a delineation there and they're smaller. So there's the sensory experience is not as all consuming. That's just a fascinating thing to think about. And I also wondered the extent to which the films are maybe not as good. A lot of what they're watching, I mean, my husband always says that if you tell a story with sock puppets, but it's like a really transcendent, as you said, sort of story, I will go along with it completely and I will get completely caught up. I think they watch a lot of stuff that's just okay, that's like pretty good, but it's not on the level of Peter Jackson or Steven Spielberg
Yeah. So the other thing that you had mentioned was when you were in high school, you went down to the Angelica and you spent your Saturday nights at the movie theater. I also loved being with my friends and going to the movies as a social activity. And I think I started that like young, like 10, 11, I'd get dropped off at a movie with a friend. Is that something your kids do?
With friends, occasionally. We are still at a point where it's like, we'll go with another family to a movie. I haven't dropped my daughter off to see a movie by herself. I think I have traumatic memories of being in high school and like having men expose themselves in New York City movie theaters. Like that happened like more than once to my friends and me. I feel like a little apprehensive about them being alone at the movies at this point. Obviously that will change over time. But we do love to go to the movies. And I am constantly annoyed at my own industry that like we aren't making more high quality PG and PG-13 films that like families can go. And I would go every single weekend if there was a film. And I look every weekend, I'm like, is there anything for us to go to the movies and see? But it's a little bit of a gray zone. Either it's the Pixar movies, which we've really outgrown, or it's a lot of times stuff that's just not quite appropriate for them. But Top Gun was like, we were so there. We were like, this is like amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. That came out while I was like really postpartum. And so my mom has a theater room at her house and it has very good sound and gave me the movie feeling. And my mom and I were like, when is Miles going to be old enough that we could just go down and watch a movie with him?
Oh, it's the best. It's truly, that has been, as I said, like the last couple of years, this great joy. And my son, in terms of his taste, is very interesting. Like he's watched all the Hitchcock movies. He like North by Northwest is like one of he watches like, he loves to like, cause I love old mysteries and spy movies. And that's all my mother's influence. And he has become my little buddy with that, like the Maltese Falcon and To Catch a Thief. And so he and I will sit and then like Ocean's 11, like Ocean's 11 is his favorite film. So he loves a heist movie, The Italian Job, Ocean's 11, even Ocean's 8 and Ocean's 12, like they're not as good, but they're good. And so that's like our thing together. My daughter and I watch like the girly sort of tween YA kind of movies. And then he and I watch like old mysteries.
That's amazing. Have you shown your daughter Clueless?
Yes. She has seen Clueless. Yes. And so she'll love Clueless and Mean Girls and Legally Blonde. Those are huge touchstones for Pitch Perfect. Those are all among her like absolute favorite films.
And like when you watch them, and most of them you're rewatching with your kids, do they feel different?
I guess so. It's always surprising to me like what they love and don't love. Like she's completely disinterested in watching Pretty in Pink. She feels like, I'm like, you will love this, but then she associates that as like an old movie. And I think she sometimes thinks like old movies are boring. And then I'm like, but all those movies that you love are like from the 90s. Like they're not new, but they feel contemporary to her in some form.
Oh, that's interesting. Is it just like the quality of the image? Because it's becoming a digital image at that point?
Must be. It must be partly that. And I think it's also the clothes. I think that I think the 90s clothes actually are like, that's what's in vogue now. And so there's a way in which it feels familiar. I also think it's that all of those movies are set in Los Angeles.
That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Or they feel like LA worlds. And Pretty in Pink does not feel like an LA world. And so I think she can maybe insert herself into those environments.
And so I love that you mentioned that it's not just watching the film, it's a family thing. You all discuss the films afterwards. Craft, is it also helping them process the emotional pieces?
For sure. Certainly, it's interesting with something like Gilmore Girls. There was like a lot of conversations with me and my daughter about Rory's boyfriends, right? And like, why is she with this guy, and which guy should she be with, and should she end up with, and is Logan really the right guy for her? Like there was a lot of that kind of conversation, which was fantastic to have. And then with Riverdale, a lot of talk about character. Like that there was some really interesting, I don't know if you've watched Riverdale, but so FP, right? So Jughead's father, who's like this kind of absentee dad, and he's a drunk, and like he's such a source of pain for Jughead in the early seasons, and then becomes this like incredible kind of partner and advocate. And the journey of that character over the course of that show is exquisite, and we like all fell in love with him. And that was like really powerful to see like this dad change, become this other person. We all watched Heartstopper together.
I don't know that one.
Oh my God. Heartstopper is this beautiful Netflix series. It's basically a teenage gay love story, but it's based on a series of graphic novels. It's so beautifully told. It's just, it was like for days afterwards, I was bereft because it felt like my first love story. Like I just was like, it just brought me back to that. But that was also a fantastic talking point for us, because it was like, okay, this is like a boy who falls in love with this ostensibly straight boy at school. And you're this kid like discover that he's bi and fall in love with this boy. When they first kissed, like we all like burst into applause. Like the whole four of us were just like cheering. But it was fascinating to be able to talk about that. First of all, for them to just even see that story and it just be so normalized and so just this is just a love story. And for them to understand that it's just love stories. Like there don't need to be straight love stories and gay love stories. It's just love stories, and this is a wonderful one. And for them to really get to experience that was very powerful, especially for me. My dad was gay, and growing up, there were no TV shows with gay characters. There was a show called My Two Dads that was about two straight men parenting a girl. And my father loved that show. And I know it's because it was like as close as he could get to some kind of representation for himself. So it's very powerful for me to just watch this like teenage gay love story, and it's totally normal for my kids.
Yeah, I can imagine that must feel really great to show your kids that, especially. So what was the first movie? I'm assuming, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, that you showed your daughter a movie first before your son was ready.
I think it was before my son was born. I remember trying to show her The Wizard of Oz when she was probably like 2.5, which is absurd, really. I remember watching that movie as a kid. It would come on TV once a year. I think maybe that's not true, but that's what I remember, that there was like an annual like network showing of The Wizard of Oz. And I remember watching it every year, just like thrilled that it was like back on TV again. And so for some reason, I was just like, this is going to be your first movie. You're going to love this movie. And she really didn't. She was just like, what the fuck is this? Just not into it, not getting it, not really connecting with it at all. And it felt like a bit of a bummer. It was one of those moments where you're just like, oh, like these children are not me. Like they are in a different world. They're different people. It was actually a great moment of realizing, okay, this is not like about me imposing my fantasy of my own childhood or whatever. So Frozen ended up being the first movie that she watched. It was on television at my godparents' house on Fire Island, and she loved it. She watched the whole thing and just loved it. And it was like, then we were off to the races, because I think it like revealed to her like, oh, this is what a movie is. Cool. I'm all in on that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I don't remember what my son's first movie was. Now that I don't even remember what his first word was. That's the horror of the second child. I forget everything about him.
So, it seems really important that your kids love movies. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
It is. I don't know what I would be very sad if they didn't. And I don't know how much of it is nature versus nurture. I think a lot of it is nurture. It's like we've exposed them to a lot. And I think because of my work, it's very clear to them that it's something to be revered, I think. And I think it's arguably the most powerful medium in the world. And so I try to frame it in that context as well for them. This is a tool of so many things, right? It is a tool of joy and entertainment and pleasure, and we can just lean into that aspect of it. It's also a tool of social change and profound illumination. And that's something I think we're getting to the point. They tend to shy away from documentaries a little bit. Oh, they're boring, but we went to the theater actually to see this film Goodnight Oppie about the Mars rovers. And they loved that. They were just like blown away by that. We've watched all of Planet Earth and they love that. And so I feel like we're moving toward a point where I think they'll become more open to some, we're really interested in the 1617 project. I want to watch that with them. It's like a process, but it's essential to me. Yeah, it's a huge part of our lives. And I think they feel that too. I think they love it.
And how do you decide what is appropriate for them?
I do rely on common sense media. I usually ignore the age recommendations because I'm clearly a slightly different page than most parents. But what I do look at is the content. And I really do. I'm concerned with extreme violence, real gore and terrorizing violence. I can't do. And then sex. I think it's interesting. It was the friend of mine that I think should be your next guest. And I won't spoil, but she has one rule for her child. And sexual violence is the one thing that's off the table. That's for sure. I tend to avoid things that have graphic sex in them just because it's really uncomfortable for them. They're not interested in it and it freaks them out, makes them uncomfortable. And I understand that. But I think we all have the point where we saw a movie that we kind of shouldn't have. I don't want to intentionally offer that to them. So that's those are the big things. And if something is really but stuff that has drinking and drugs and those are things that don't particularly concern me because those are conversations that we're having all the time. And then violence, if it feels like it can be contextualized, and it's I won't watch anything where bad things happen to children. Violence with children is really hard, or AK-47s,
glorified,
unless it's superhero movie, a school shooting movie, would never be on the table for us. Things like that. But yeah, I'm pretty I try to be pretty broad. And if it's something I can't watch with them, then I narrow it even more. My daughter has been consistently asking to watch Easy A, which I've never seen, and I read enough about it. And I'm like, I don't think you could just go off on your own and watch that. I feel like I either need to watch it with you or I need to watch it first. It has to be something that I have some awareness of what it really is.
And when you were young, did you typically have your mom or your parents or a friend with you when you were watching movies? Did you watch a lot alone?
I don't think I watched a lot alone until later, like until high school. I feel like when I was very young, we would watch stuff together mostly. I think my mom and my dad would show me very much more traditional movies like Groucho Marx stuff and like old musicals and My Fair Lady and things like that. He did. I remember we watched Arthur. He showed me Arthur when I was pretty young. I was probably like 8 or 9. And that's like a little dicey in the beginning. Dudley Moore takes his hooker back to his hotel. And like that, I remember being a little like, who is she? And what's the deal with her? There was a little bit of like something, but that movie is so moving. And it's like such a beautiful story of friendship and like this person becoming himself, and really strong, fond memory of watching that movie with my dad. And to this day, I love that film. I had to get over the little bump of that intro, and then it was worth it.
And I think you bring up a great point that sometimes showing things that are slightly beyond their maturity level is great in order to have the discussion about the things that are coming, rather than being afraid of showing them too soon. And especially from what I'm hearing, things are happening earlier and earlier for kids.
And for my daughter, I feel like that has been huge. There's a lot of, we talk a lot about sex and even things like rape and drugs and parties, and like all of these things come about. We end up talking about them because of things that happen in the film that we've seen. And it's a very helpful way for her to learn about things without having to experience them firsthand. And she's still young enough that she wants to talk about them, which is
and
great.
It's easier to talk about it when it's not her. So it's like a vehicle, it's a character that she can play out outside of her body.
Totally. And she has all those questions, and she is curious about it. And there are kids at school who talk about things. And it is like the right age for her to be wondering about these things. And so it's like a sort of perfect platform or launch pad for those conversations. And to then also be looking at the choices that characters make.
The consequences.
And the consequences, yeah. I feel like she just watched something. There was like something about, or maybe we were talking about watching it, but like, where a girl gets pregnant and I'm not going to remember what it is. But what are the consequences? How do the characters handle them? How do the parents handle the things that the children do? Like that's really talked about, like, are so-and-so a good parent when they allow this or they get mad about that?
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. There's a show actually called, oh God, I'm not going to remember the name of the show. It's a sort of documentary type show, like a reality show about different parenting styles.
Yes, I watched it. I like really watched it because I'm like about to have a toddler or at the beginning of a toddler. And I'm just like, discipline versus, they all have similar things about them. And what I noticed was it's like sticking to your limits, giving your kid a sense of freedom and agency, and a really good attachment.
Yes, absolutely 100%. And it was great to watch that with them and just be like, okay, first of all, who do you think we're like, right? Are we like them? It was really interesting to hear like how they assess us or interpret us. But then, like seeing the way that parents make certain choices and like having our kids be like, that was like really too harsh, or like that was not harsh enough. Or so all of that I think is super valuable. And again, as you said, like in a fictional context, it's like really easy because it's not about like they can create that distance. And so
the stranger danger thing of that, I keep being like, how do I instill that in my son? And that's such a great idea to watch it with them because they see how scary it is.
Oh my God, yes. My kids were so freaked out. I was like super freaked out by that whole thing, because for those of you who haven't seen it, they do a simulation where a stranger comes to the door and they see if the kids know not to let the person in the house. And like most of these kids let the person in the house. They're like, oh, we're from the gas company, we need to check. And most of the kids were like, okay, sure, come in. And it was like harrowing to watch, but my children know for sure. And some of that is also on the scarier stuff. I don't want my children to be terrified of the world. And I want them to know that the world has some fucked up characters in it. There are some realities. I do want them to be like a little bit afraid of strange people and kidnapping and murder, and it's like a little bit of that feels like a decent thing.
Yeah, the reality of it. And I think also kids probably know the kid that's going to be the school shooter.
Yeah.
And like being able to say, hey, Mom, I think I'm worried about one of my classmates. Like being able to teach your kids to speak up to you.
Yes. Yeah. So it's the more you can find ways to talk to them and engage with them about the world, like, to me, that's the whole goal. And it's how I've related to them since they were born. Like, I've never talked to them like babies, for better and for worse. I'm certainly like warm and nurturing, but I also respect them as people. And that translates into an assumption that they can handle and navigate the world in all of its realities, or in most of its realities.
Wanting to set them up for the world. So my last two questions are intertwined. One is if you recommend one film or first film for me to show my son, and the other is which film would make him love cinema as an art. So
oh wow,
I realize that they can't necessarily be the same.
I feel like you should show him E.T., but that's a hard first film maybe for. It is a little. There's a lot going on. Gosh, I don't know. He's 15 months, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want his first film to be in a theater, and I'm like not like against when he's 4 years old for his birthday renting out a theater and bringing all of his friends to see a movie. Like if the one doesn't exist that I want to show him.
LA
I'm in LA. Yeah.
So I have an outdoor movie set up in my house, which is super fun. And it was not like complicated. I got it on Amazon. Like, it's a huge screen and a pretty decent projector. And so we do a lot of outdoor movie nights with friends and stuff. It's really a fun thing to do here. It's one of the, if it ever stops raining, which maybe it never will. So yeah, gosh, his first movie. I'm like thinking about, I don't know why Toy Story popped into my mind. Toy Story is actually kind of a genius film. It's like really brilliant, but all those Pixar movies are so good.
It might be Cars for him because he does really love cars. Like, he does round and round for wheels. Like, he'll just do it with his hands.
That's good. That's the thing. I think it's like leaning into his interests, like leaning into what is he love, because then he's going to connect and he's going to want more. Yeah. I really wish I could remember what my son's first movie. I have to ask my husband if he remembers. I know we went to see Cinderella in the movie theater, the live action with Lily. What's her name? Lily James. See, again, I can't remember any fucking names. Anyway, we saw that in the theater. I think that might have been my son's first movie theater experience. Or maybe that was my daughter's first movie theater experience. I don't know. I remember taking her to Wonder Woman in the theater.
Oh, that's a fun one.
That was like profound. That felt very powerful to show her that in the theater. And she was definitely, I went and saw it first because it was PG-13 and she was really only 7 or 8. So I was like, oh, is this? And I was like, oh yeah, she has to see this. It's too good. The film that I do think that E.T. is like the film to show a kid who, if you want to show them the magic of cinema. It's
especially
like,
a young boy.
Yeah. What is more magical and incredible than that movie? I can't think of a kids movie that's like more artfully made.
Yeah, it might be for his 4th or 5th birthday, depending on how mature he is at the time.
Yeah, we just watched, I guess it's a little older. We did an outdoor movie night for my son's 2nd grade class, and we did Night at the Museum.
Oh, that's a fun one.
And they loved that. That was really fun. I've never seen Jurassic Park. That's like a weird blank spot in my, but that I think also like, it's a little scarier.
It's a little scarier, but he does. I'm going to start with the museums so he gets to know dinosaurs a little bit. But it's one of his first like sounds was like, what does a dinosaur make? And it's like, rah.
Oh, that's so fun. You have so many fun. That's the thing. It just gets more fun in terms of being able to share these things with them. It's such a joy for me to get to, and it's just like only more and more. It's like this year was like the first year where we actually watched a bunch of the Oscar contenders. And it's like, that's like my dream is when we can go to all of the fall movies together. We're only a few years away from that. And I'm really looking forward to that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I knew you were a perfect person for this.
I love it. I love that you're doing this. I think it's an amazing. I can't wait to listen to the other episodes and hear everybody else's points of view, because we're all just trying to figure it out. And I think no one wants to scar their children, but at the same time, I think there's wisdom in not being afraid of the things it will bring up for them, and just like actually looking at that as an opportunity to connect and to expand their understanding of things. That's really what movies do for all of us. And so I think to allow that to happen for our kids is a real gift.
Yeah, it definitely is. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. Leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.